My reading today is from Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. Blessed be. I saw the movie this week called The Post. Has anybody seen that? It's excellent. It's an excellent movie with Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks. It doesn't get any better than that. And I really recommend it to people. The movie is about the Washington Post and the Pentagon Papers from June of 1971. When I saw the movie, it was actually pretty shocking to me because I lived through this time and I didn't really understand what happened. I had heard of the Pentagon Papers, but I didn't really understand what it was. It was a man named Daniel Ellsberg who went into the Pentagon and stole papers, very highly classified documents. And he took these documents and he made copies of them. The documents were conversations, discussions, sort of like emails back and forth before there were emails, between the top military people in the country and the top government officials in the country, including the presidents. And what Daniel Ellsberg became aware of was how much the government was lying to the American people. The government was saying, we are winning the war in Vietnam. And these correspondences for years said, oh no, we're not. We are terribly losing the war in Vietnam. And in fact, there's no way that we're ever going to win the war in Vietnam unless we ramp it up with more and more and more troops. The presidents, particularly Johnson and Nixon, escalated the war by sending more and more troops in. They did this, according to the Pentagon Papers, to save face. America had never lost a war before, and they didn't want to be the president when the war was lost. In other words, it was ego-driven. And in the meantime, thousands and thousands and thousands of America young soldiers were being killed. I remember the day my brother got his draft notice, his draft number. So this was going on, and the movie really clearly showed how much pride was involved in these decisions to keep sending our troops. And that was shocking to me. But the thing that was more shocking to me that I did not realize is that the New York Times got a copy of these Pentagon Papers, and they printed some of it. Upon printing it, President Nixon and the court put a gag order on them. They were no longer allowed to print any more of the Pentagon Papers. In other words, the government shut down the press. The government said, we will send you to jail if you print the truth. Wow. Sometimes I wonder if that's happening now, too. If our press is getting shut down. It's certainly getting maligned, and we don't know anymore who to trust. When our president talks, we don't know if he's telling the truth or a lie. When we watch TV, the news, we have Fox News and CNN News. They're pretty different. We don't know which one is true or how much of the truth. If we listen to radio to the news, depends if you listen to AM or FM. We don't know who to trust anymore, who to believe anymore. But what I have noticed is that because of this mistrust with the news and our government, that there's a genuine kind of low-grade anxiety or depression going on. Have you noticed that? Every time a new tweet comes out, there is a sadness, an anxiety going on. Have you felt that? I have certainly felt that. And I know that it's disheartening because this is our country. This is the country we were born and raised in, and it's disturbing. But here's the good news. Back in 1971, there were courageous, honest, forthright, walk in integrity people that came forward. They defied the court orders and they printed the Pentagon Papers. The country went wild. They rose up when they became aware of all these lies that were being told to them. And they marched, and they protested, and they burned their draft cards, and they went to jail instead of going to war, and they demanded the end of the Vietnam War, which happened. It happened because many, many individuals, many, just like you and me, stood up and said no, and marched, and joined together, and said no more. In January of 1973, the peace accord with Vietnam was signed, and the war ended after 14 long years. I'm here to tell you that those courageous, honest, forthright, walk in integrity people still exist. They're still here, right here in this room, right here in the world. And if you look back over our history, you will see they have always been there. The people that stand up and take the risk and are courageous, honest, forthright, and walk in personal integrity. So today, I want to honor African American people who have done that in our country. This is February. It's the month of Black History Month. And I have to talk about the people who are willing to wade in the water, to wade into the troubled waters and stand and march and take risk and demand changes that eventually did happen, and we're still in that process. Carter Woodson was such a man. He was born in 1875, and he spent his life lobbying schools and organizations, trying to get them to teach African American history as part of American history. What a concept. Because the African American history was happening at the same time as the recorded history as we were taught as U.S. history. In 1926, Woodson was a professor at Howard University, and he implemented Negro History Week. The program caught on, and soon it was expanded to Black History Month. He chose February because it had the birthdays of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass and also Abraham Lincoln. It took 50 years, from 1926 to 1976, before a U.S. president acknowledged and declared that February was to be the Black History Month. This morning, though, I decided I don't really want to talk to you about the big names in the Black history movement, like Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, because I figure you probably already know their stories. We hear a lot about them. Today, I want to focus instead on some people that we don't really know their names. We don't really know who they are, but they had changed our world. I want to start with the slaves. 12 million Africans were shipped to North America from 1750 until 1820 as slaves. Each woman had an average of 9 to 10 children who were also enslaved, who grew up and had more children who were also enslaved. Approximately 100 million Black African Americans were slaves in America. We're talking generations of people. Most of those people are nameless For many, there's not a record of them even having been on the planet, that they lived here at all. No record. And yet countless numbers of them came together, waded into the troubled waters, and worked together to free slaves with the Underground Railway, to abolish slavery completely, to fight against injustice, to fight against racism, and to demand freedom and equality. Let's take Robert Smalls, for example. He was born into slavery in 1839 in South Carolina. When he was 12 years old, his master sent him to Charleston to get a job on the docks so he could earn money and give it all back to his master. Well, Robert went off to Charleston, and he loved the docks. He loved the boats. He loved the sea. He got a lot of different jobs there. He was a dock worker, and then he was a sail maker, and then he was a rigger on the boat. And eventually, he worked his way up to be what was called a wheeler. Now, the wheeler drove the boat. They were actually the pilot of the ship. They were actually the captain of the ship. But black people back then could not be given such a title. So he was called the wheeler. In 1861, the Civil War broke out. Smalls was ordered to pilot the ship, called the Planter, to pick up supplies from further south and bring them up for the Confederate Army. He did as he was told, and he made that trip many times. And then one day, when the ship was docked in Charleston, the 3 white officers went ashore to eat dinner and spend the night in their homes. Well, at 4:30 in the morning, Smalls took the ship and all of its slaves and all of their families, and he took the ship out into the ocean and drove north. He put up a big white sheet as a surrender flag, and he was sailing them to freedom. You think he was scared? You betcha. Yeah. You think he was courageous? I think we're going to have to say yes to that one too. When the news of his daring feat reached President Lincoln, he was rewarded by being given a private audience with the president. When he talked to Lincoln, he talked to him about allowing African Americans to join the Union Army and to fight for their freedom. Lincoln was persuaded, and in 1863, black men were allowed to join the U.S. Army for the first time ever. Robert Smalls spent the rest of his life fighting for the end of racism. He was courageous, he was honest, he was forthright, and he was a man of integrity. Next, I want to tell you about Bessie Coleman. She was born in a one-room shack in Texas in 1892, one of 13 children, and she spent her whole childhood working in the fields, picking cotton, trying to keep her family at the survival level. When she got older, she decided to move north to Chicago and live with one of her older brothers, hoping for a better life. She became a manicurist. Not exactly a fulfilling job for her. She was a very bright girl. But it was a job where she got to listen to the gossip. As she was doing the nails, people would be telling all the gossip. And she was particularly interested when the gossip turned to the returning pilots who had just fought in World War I. She was entranced. She just couldn't stop thinking about flying an airplane up in the air. She made up her mind right then and there she was going to be a pilot. Now, it was 1918. Female pilots were practically not ever heard of. The couple that there were very wealthy white socialites. Black female pilots, guess how many there were of those in America? 0. Yep, 0. They were non-existent. But Bessie was determined. She was determined that her skin color was not going to stop her from learning how to fly. According to Wikipedia, Coleman was stonewalled by racism and sexism from American pilots who scoffed at her desire to fly. However, the publisher of the Chicago Defender, a black man, encouraged her to go abroad and learn to fly. He financed her trip to Paris, and for 7 months she trained with some of the best pilots in Europe. She was the only black person in her class. She was one of 2 women in her class, but nonetheless, she earned her pilot's license in 1921. She wasn't going to let anybody stop her. When she came back to the United States, people had heard about her story, about against all odds and with the courage that they couldn't even imagine. She became the first black female pilot in America. The newspaper got a hold of it. They wired it to other newspapers, and kind of like social media, it spread throughout the country. And she became almost an instant celebrity, inspiring young black women to pursue their love of flying if they wanted to do that, and also black men. She was an inspiration. But at the same time, 1921, aviation hadn't really taken off, no pun intended. So she became a stunt flyer, the first black woman in America to stage a public flight. Again, she was courageous. She followed her dream despite all the odds that said she couldn't do it. She didn't give up. She kept moving forward. The reality is that's all we have to do. That's all we have to do is keep moving forward. The last person I want to talk to you about is Ruby Bridges. You may know her. I understand there is a movie made about her. I didn't see the movie, but I did see her speaking to an elementary school class about her story. Ruby was 6 years old, and she was the first black child to be integrated into an all-white elementary school. It was William Franz Elementary School in New Orleans. The first day of school, she was accompanied with 4 U.S. government marshals and her mother. She was instructed to stand in the middle of the 4 of them and not look back and just go forward. They didn't actually tell her any information at all, except that she was going to change schools. And so when she arrived at the school, and there were a large group of white people, she thought it was Mardi Gras. That's the only time she had seen that many people. And they were yelling and screaming at her, and she was confused why they were angry, because it was Mardi Gras. And they got to the steps, and they were approached by the police barricade right there. And one policeman said, "I have a letter right here from the governor of Louisiana that says you may not cross this line." And the U.S. Marshal said, "Well, I've got a letter right here from the U.S. President that says we can." And they crossed that line, and they walked up the stairs, and they put Ruby in the principal's office. Now, they hadn't told the public which elementary school was going to admit a black child. So every morning at all the elementary schools, the parents gathered in case it was theirs. So this morning, they knew it was their school. They put her in the principal's office, and all the parents rushed into the school and got their children out of there. Took all the children, all the white children, out of the school. The teachers refused to teach a black student, all except for one person, Barbara Henry. I would like to say that was my mother, but it wasn't. Maybe we're related somehow, I don't know. So the first day she sat in the principal's office all day long, and when she went home, she thought to herself, this is a really easy school. There's really no work. You just sit there all day and you get to color. Well, the second day she went back, and they walked her down the long hallway and up the stairs and down another hallway to her classroom, where she went in, and she was the only student. She wasn't the only student in her classroom. She was the only student in the school. She had private one-on-one lessons with Barbara Henry. Again, no information was given to her. So she started wondering, where are the kids? Where are the kids? Because in her last school, there were a lot of kids there. There were children. And she decided for herself that they were hiding. They were playing hide-and-go-seek with her. And then she figured out, because she was a smart little girl, that they must be hiding in that cafeteria. She was not allowed to go to the cafeteria ever. She had to eat only what her mother packed for her in her lunch, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day, because there were threats to poison her. She did not know this. So one day she decided, well, how can I get to the cafeteria? And she threw her lunch away when Miss Henry wasn't looking. And when it came to lunchtime, her teacher said, "Where's your lunch, darling?" And she said, "I'm going to have to go to the cafeteria to get food today." She wanted to find the children. Well, of course, there weren't any children there. And so she was disappointed. Then she looked out the back windows of her classroom, and she saw this great big playground and all this equipment. But she only saw 4 U.S. Marshals. And she was, again, confused. At her old school, everybody got to go to recess. And the children all came together and played. She never got to go to recess. They would not let her go out on the playground. Again, it was too dangerous for her, but they didn't tell her. But she, the hardest part for her was the loneliness. Not having any friends, not having any kids to make friends with. But nonetheless, she showed up every day. She walked through that angry mob every day for a year. The marshals and her mother walked her to school. After a while, some of the white parents decided to think, hey, our kids aren't getting an education. Wait a minute. And a few brave families walked through the mob to get their kids in the school. Well, Ruby ran across one of them on her way to the restroom, and she said, "Oh my gosh, let's play." And the little boy said to her, "Oh, I'm not allowed to play with you." And she said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Because you're a nigger." And all of a sudden, in first grade, this little girl realized what was happening. Nobody was coming to school just because her skin color was black. Tragic. Was it hard for her? Yeah. Was she courageous? Yeah. We got to put her in that category. Was it worth it? Well, I think it was. This one little courageous, honest, forthright, walk in integrity, little girl, little 6-year-old, changed the world. So, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with you? Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you it because I want to tell you, if you are discouraged right now, if you are discouraged by the way our country is right now, or you're lonely right now, you don't think you have a friend in the world, I want to remind you that always in our country, in the past and in the present, there have been incredible people who have been willing to step into the troubled waters and move our country forward. I want you to know that's happening right now. People are stepping forward for the change our country needs to make. And you are part of those people. You are the people who are Unitarian Universalist. We sing a different song here. We sing a song that says everybody has inherent worth and dignity, no matter a skin color, no matter sexual orientation, no matter gender, no matter. Every person has inherent worth and dignity here. We also stand on the side of justice and equality for everyone on the planet. We also are committed to working toward world peace. It matters. It matters that you show up and you stand up and you're honest and you're forthright and you speak your truth, even when it's hard. It matters what you're doing. So I want to support you in not being discouraged by what's happening right now, because movement is still happening. And I don't want you to get so discouraged that you get inertia and you stop moving. Because I want to say Martin Luther King Jr.'s words to you one more time. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, keep moving forward. Blessed be and amen. Thank you.